The first gunshot split the night like thunder cracking the heavens, and Alara Dawson barely flinched as the bullet splintered the doorframe inches from her head. She'd been waiting for death to come calling for 3 long years, and yet her trembling fingers betrayed her as she reached for the rifle mounted above the hearth. The second shot punched through the window, sending glass shards scattering across the worn wooden floor of her isolated ranch house. Through the broken pane, she could make out 5 silhouettes on horseback, their features obscured by the driving snow of the worst blizzard to hit the territory in decades. What caught her eye wasn't the men themselves, but the glint of something metallic around each rider's neck, identical gold pocket watches swinging from chains that somehow reflected the meager lamplight, despite the swirling snow. Not random outlaws then, but men with purpose, and men who belonged to someone. One rider dismounted, approaching her porch with a casual confidence that chilled her more than the howling wind. Alara chambered a round steady despite everything and fired back a warning shot that disappeared into the white void. Now, Mrs. Dawson." The voice called out eerily calm above the howl of the wind. "You're only making this harder on yourself. Mr. Blackwood sends his regards," and this something landed on her porch with a soft thud, as a reminder that patience has its limits. "Tell Blackwood he can go to hell." Alara shouted back, her voice stronger than she felt. "My husband paid for this land in blood, and I'll follow him to the grave before I sign it away." "As you wish," the voice replied with unsettling pleasantness. Though Mr. Blackwood did mention that graves can be arranged quite easily in these parts. "Consider this your final courtesy." The riders hesitated then, as if struck by sudden doubt or perhaps simply unwilling to die in this godforsaken storm, and they wheeled their mounts and vanished into the swirling darkness. She stood frozen, listening to the howl that seemed to carry away the last echoes of violence, leaving her alone once more, with only her ghosts for company and a growing certainty that whoever had sent these men wouldn't be deterred by a single failed attempt. When dawn broke pale and tentative across the snow-covered landscape, Alara cautiously opened her door rifle ready. On her porch lay a small wooden box, ornately carved with the initials SB, burned into its polished surface. With gloved hands, she picked it up, carried it inside, and placed it on her kitchen table, staring at it as though it might explode. Perhaps it would. After 3 steadying breaths, she flipped the brass latch and lifted the lid. A folded document slid out along with something that made her breath catch a tarnished silver ring she instantly recognized as Thomas's wedding band, which should have been buried with him these 3 years past. Beside it lay a handwritten note in elegant script. "Your husband chose poorly, Mrs. Dawson. His time ran out. Yours is running." Her hand shaking, Alara unfolded the document, a deed of sale already prepared, with only her signature required at the bottom. The name on the buyer's line made her blood run cold. Silas Blackwood, a man whose reputation for ruthlessness was matched only by his seemingly unstoppable expansion across the territory. The message couldn't have been clearer. Blackwood had been behind Thomas's murder all along, and now he expected her to surrender what her husband had died protecting. She clutched the ring, pressing its cool metal against her palm, feeling rage and grief twisting together in her chest. "You were right, Thomas," she whispered to the empty kitchen. "It was Blackwood all along, and he thinks I'll just fold like the others." She slipped the ring onto her thumb, the only finger large enough to hold it, and placed the deed into the stove, watching with grim satisfaction as the flames consumed it. Her decision was made. If death was coming for her, she would meet it standing her ground, just as Thomas had done. It was only when Alara ventured out to assess the property damage that she found him half buried in snow near her barn, a dark, shapeless mass she initially mistook for a fallen branch. The stranger was barely alive. His skin blue-tinged his clothes, frozen stiff with blood and ice. She might have left him there like most folks in these parts would have done, for survival in the Western Territories meant making hard choices, and a stranger meant danger. But something in his face, peaceful despite his grievous condition, reminded her of Thomas. Without pondering the decision further, she dragged the unconscious man across the yard, leaving a crimson trail in the pristine snow that would soon be covered by fresh powder, erasing any evidence of his arrival. Only after she had him inside, warmed by the hearth, did she notice the blood-soaked cloth wrapped around his neck, holding what appeared to be a shattered gold pocket watch, identical to those worn by her nighttime visitors. Her hand moved instinctively to her rifle, but something stayed her. The man's hands, cruelly bandaged in crimson-stained rags, told a different story. This was no attacker, but perhaps a victim of the same men who had threatened her. "Who are you?" she murmured, carefully removing the frozen watch from his neck. When she pried open its damaged case, her blood ran cold. Engraved inside was a name she knew well, Julian Vance, son of the territory's most powerful ranching family and Blackwood's chief rival. Reports had circulated weeks ago about the youngest Vance disappearing during the blizzard, presumed dead by most. She'd never met him personally, but everyone knew of the Vance family's cultured youngest son who'd returned from music studies back east, only to vanish during the worst storm in decades. "Looks like Blackwood's been busy," she whispered, unwrapping the crude bandages from his hands. What she found beneath made her stomach heave. Where fingers should have been, there were only carefully healing stumps, evidence of methodical amputation rather than accident. All 10 fingers gone, leaving his hands like grotesque paws, a deliberate act of cruelty that made her own hands shake with rage. "My God, what kind of monster would do this to a pianist? You'd better not die on me, Vance," she muttered, rewrapping the wounds with clean bandages. "I've got questions that need answering, and you may be the key to bringing down the bastard who killed my husband." The stranger remained unconscious for 4 days, and when he finally stirred awake on the 5th morning, Alara was changing the bandages she'd wrapped around his mutilated hands. His eyes flew open wide with terror and confusion, a startling shade of amber like whiskey held to sunlight. She pressed him gently back against the pillows as he tried to rise his lips, forming words that wouldn't come. Despite her suspicion that she knew his identity, she couldn't be certain the trauma of his injuries might have affected his memory. "Easy now," she soothed. "You're safe for the moment, though I can't promise for how long." "Nutter." He managed to rasp the first word he'd spoken, his voice like rusty hinges from disuse. As she held the cup to his lips, her gaze fell on the damaged pocket watch she'd placed on her bedside table. He followed her eyes, and a flash of pure terror crossed his face. With surprising strength, he knocked the cup away and tried to scramble backward. "No, get rid of it," he gasped, his voice breaking with panic. "They'll find me, find you if you keep it." "Who will find us?" Alara pressed, retrieving the cup, but making no move toward the watch. "Who did this to you? Was it Silas Blackwood?" The name triggered a violent reaction. The man's entire body convulsed as though she'd struck him, his amber eyes widening with primal fear. But when she expected recognition to follow instead, his face went blank with confusion. He looked at his ruined hands, as if seeing them for the first time, horror dawning slowly. "My hands," he whispered, staring at the bandaged stumps. "My fingers. They're gone." He looked up at her, his eyes wild with desperation. "Why can't I remember? Who am I? What happened to me?" The question struck Alara with unexpected force. This wasn't the reaction of someone playing ignorant, and the raw terror and confusion were too genuine, too visceral. Whatever Blackwood had done to Julian Vance went beyond physical torture. Somehow he'd taken the man's memory as well, leaving him untethered from his own identity. "I don't know what happened to you," she said truthfully, choosing to withhold her suspicions about his identity until she was certain. "I found you half dead in the snow near my barn 5 days ago. As for who you are..." She hesitated. "I was hoping you could tell me." "I don't know," he whispered the admission, clearly paining him more than his physical wounds. I don't know anything, not who I am, not who did this, not why. His ruined hands rose slightly from the bed covers, then fell back helplessly. Only fragments. Music, snow, pain. And a name that isn't mine. And a name. What name? Alara asked sharply. Blackwood. He replied, his voice barely audible. I hear it in my nightmares along with screaming. My screaming, I think. That's all right. She continued with forced brightness, though her mind raced with the implications. I'll call you John for now, if that suits you. And perhaps in time, the rest will come back. As days stretched into weeks, John regained his strength, though not his memory or his full voice, speaking only when necessary, in short, hoarse sentences. The town doctor Jeremiah Mills braved the snow to examine him, declaring the amputations had been done with surgical precision. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. Mills said, examining the healing stumps. They wanted to ensure maximum trauma without risking death. The cuts are clean, the major blood vessels cauterized immediately to prevent fatal blood loss. He glanced up at Alara, his weathered face troubled. This isn't the work of common outlaws. This is calculated cruelty with a purpose. What purpose could possibly justify this? Alara demanded, gesturing toward John, who sat silently by the fire, his ruined hands carefully hidden in his lap. Mills lowered his voice, though John could clearly still hear them. There are rumors, Alara, about Blackwood's special punishment for those who cross him. They say he keeps trophies. Trophies, she repeated, her stomach turning. Mills nodded grimly. From what I hear, he has a collection of souvenirs from those who've defied him. Fingers preserved in jars with names and dates. A reminder of his power. That's monstrous, Alara whispered. It's also effective. Mills replied, packing away his medical supplies. No one stands against him now. He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. There's another rumor making the rounds about Julian Vance's disappearance. Some say Blackwood had him taken during the blizzard as a warning to the Vance family to stop interfering with his expansion. Alara's eyes flicked involuntarily toward John, who appeared lost in his own thoughts, staring at the dancing flames. What do you think happened to Vance? Mills shrugged, but his expression was guarded. The official story is that he was caught in the blizzard riding back from town. But the Vance family has gone suspiciously quiet lately, even as Blackwood encroaches on their territory. Something happened that night, and whatever it was has changed the balance of power in this region. After the doctor left, John spoke from his place by the fire, his voice stronger than it had been before. He suspects who I am, doesn't he? Alara, startled by his perceptiveness, chose honesty. He has his theories. So do I. And what is your theory? John asked, his amber eyes reflecting the firelight, giving them an almost supernatural glow. I think you might be Julian Vance, she said plainly, watching his face for any reaction. Youngest son of the Vance family, educated back east, returned to help run the family ranch, only to disappear during the blizzard months ago. John closed his eyes, concentrating hard. Julian Vance. He repeated the name, rolling it around his mouth, as though tasting it. It means nothing to me. Nothing at all. His shoulders slumped in defeat. I should leave. My presence puts you in danger. From what I gather, I'm already in danger. Alara replied, showing him Thomas's ring and explaining about the nighttime visitors, Blackwood's ultimatum, and her refusal to sell the ranch. Whatever your connection to Blackwood, our troubles are already intertwined. Maybe that's why you washed up on my doorstep like a shipwreck survivor. Or maybe I'm the storm that brought the shipwreck, he countered softly. Have you considered that possibility? The question hung between them unanswered, but not forgotten, as winter's grip slowly loosened across the territory. Spring came early that year, melting the snow and transforming the land into a temporary Eden of wildflowers and green grass before the summer heat would scorch it all away. John ventured outside more frequently now, his strength returning with each passing day, moving with an unexpected grace that suggested physical training beyond that of an ordinary ranch hand or drifter. He'd taken to helping Alara with chores that didn't require fine manipulation, developing ingenious ways to compensate for his missing fingers. Though still sparing with words, he communicated through gestures and expressions, his amber eyes expressive in ways that made words seem superfluous. One evening, after they had finished repairs on a section of fencing, John paused, gazing across the valley toward the distant mountains. "This land is worth fighting for," he said simply. "I understand now why you won't leave. It was Thomas's dream." Alara replied, her voice soft with memory. "He used to say this valley had music in it, the way the wind moved through the grass, the rhythm of the seasons. He gave everything to build something here." "Everything, including his life," John added with unexpected insight. "You never told me exactly how he died." Alara hesitated, the memory still painful, even after 3 years. "They found him by the creek that runs through the south pasture. His throat had been cut ear to ear. The sheriff claimed it was passing outlaws, but..." She twisted Thomas's ring, which she now wore on a chain around her neck. Thomas had been investigating water rights issues before he died. He believed someone was illegally diverting streams throughout the territory, causing artificial drought on specific properties, which were then bought for pennies when the owners couldn't sustain their livestock. Blackwood. John surmised, his gaze sharpening with interest. Thomas could never prove it. The sheriff spent all of 20 minutes examining the scene before declaring it the work of random violence. Her mouth tightened with old anger. 3 days after the funeral, Blackwood's men came with their first offer to buy the ranch, far below its value, of course. They've been coming back ever since, each time more threatening than the last. "And you've held out alone all this time." John's voice held a note of respectful amazement. "This land is all I have left of Thomas. I'm not giving it up without a fight." She studied him curiously. "You seem awfully interested in water rights for a man with no memory." A flicker of something recognition perhaps crossed his face before disappearing. "I don't know why, but something about what you said feels important. Like something I should remember." It happened on an unusually cool evening in late spring, when the sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed almost too beautiful to be real. Alara had been sorting through a trunk of Thomas's belongings, something she'd put off for 3 years when she found the old sheet music he'd brought with him from back east. On impulse, she carried it to the dusty, upright piano in the corner of the living room, an extravagance Thomas had surprised her with on their first anniversary that had gone untouched since his death. She was so absorbed in the yellowed pages that she didn't notice John standing in the doorway, watching her with an unreadable expression. It was only when she placed the music on the stand and ran her fingers experimentally over the ivory keys, producing a discordant sound from the long-neglected instrument, that she became aware of his presence. Something in his face had changed, a spark of recognition perhaps, or pain so acute it transformed his features. "You play?" she asked gently, seeing how he stared at the instrument with such naked longing. I'm not sure," he answered, his voice uncertain. "But something about it." He approached the piano slowly, as one might approach a wild animal afraid to startle it into flight, his ruined hands trembling at his sides. What happened next would forever remain etched in Alara's memory, as the moment everything changed. John sat beside her on the narrow bench, his body rigid with tension, and lifted his mutilated hands, hovering them above the keys for a long moment before bringing them down. Using his palms, wrists, and knuckles, he began to tap out a rhythm complex and disjointed, yet undeniably intentional. His face contorted with concentration and frustration as he struggled to create something, the ghost of a melody, perhaps that existed clearly in his mind, but could not be fully realized through his damaged hands. Tears streamed down his face. Though he seemed unaware of them, his entire being focused on this impossible task of making music without fingers. "Play with me," he whispered without looking up. "Please, I can hear it, but I can't make it happen." Moved by his determination and grief, Alara hesitantly placed her own hands on the keys, attempting to follow his lead to give voice to whatever song was trapped inside him. Her playing was clumsy, untrained, but as they worked together, something extraordinary emerged, a haunting melody that caused John to freeze his eyes wide with shock. The final notes hung in the air between them like a revelation, a key turning in a long rusted lock. Moonlight Sonata. He breathed the name coming to him from nowhere and everywhere at once. Beethoven. Third movement. I used to play it for my mother when father was away on business. She called it my storm music, said it sounded like thunder on the horizon. His words stopped abruptly, his body beginning to shake with violent tremors that alarmed Alara until she realized what was happening. The music had unlocked something a dam had broken, and memories were flooding back, overwhelming him with their sudden clarity. "Julian," he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. "My name is Julian Vance." The confirmation of what she'd suspected hit Alara with physical force. Julian Vance, of the North Valley Vances, the cattle baron family. He nodded, his eyes distant with recollection. The youngest son. The disappointment who chose piano keys over cattle branding. The one they sent east to be educated to become something more than a rancher. A bitter laugh escaped him as he held up his mutilated hands. "And now I'm nothing." "You're alive," Alara corrected firmly. "Which is more than Blackwood intended, I'd wager." As the night deepened, Julian's memories returned in fragments, disjointed pieces of a life suddenly remembered. He had been the black sheep of the family, more interested in music than ranching, returning from his education in New York to find his father dying, and the neighboring Baron Silas Blackwood circling like a vulture. The family dynamics emerged through his recollections. Michael the eldest, practical and methodical with an engineer's mind for systems and efficiency. Daniel the middle son, hot-headed and impulsive, a natural fighter, but with a generous heart. His mother, Eleanor, aristocratic by birth, but frontier tough by necessity, who had run the ranch alongside her husband with equal authority. My brothers were handling the ranch, but they needed my help with the legal matters, the banking connections I'd made back east. Julian explained, staring at his ruined hands. Blackwood had been buying up land all around ours, pushing out smaller ranchers with threats, intimidation, and when that didn't work, violence. Alara felt a chill run through her at his words, remembering Thomas's suspicions about cattle that had gone missing, the strange men who'd been seen riding their boundaries in the weeks before his death. I started gathering evidence of his methods, speaking to people he'd driven out, documenting the pattern. Julian continued. I discovered something bigger than land grabs, though. Blackwood was systematically altering the watershed throughout the territory. Water rights. Alara breathed understanding dawning. That's what Thomas was investigating before he died. Julian's eyes sharpened with sudden intensity. Thomas Dawson, your husband. He contacted me 3 months ago with information about creek flows being diverted. He had maps, calculations, he'd been tracking the changes for over a year. His face darkened with realization. I was on my way to meet him when I was ambushed. The revelation hit Alara like a physical blow. Thomas had been working with the Vances, collecting evidence against Blackwood. All this time she'd thought he'd been acting alone, but he'd been part of something larger, a coordinated effort to bring down the Baron. Thomas never mentioned the Vances. She said, struggling to reconcile this new information with what she thought she knew. He said he was meeting an informant who had evidence about the water rights. Security precaution, Julian explained. We kept the connection quiet, knowing Blackwood had informants throughout the territory. Your husband was incredibly brave, Alara. The information he'd gathered was the cornerstone of our case, and it got him killed. She whispered, a fresh wave of grief washing over her. Julian's voice faltered as he reached the most painful part of his recollection. They ambushed me during the blizzard. I never made it to meet Thomas. Blackwood was there himself, watching as they tied me down. A pianist with no fingers, he said, is just another useless mouth to feed. But I want you to live, Vance, live, and remember who took your music away. Julian's eyes had gone distant, reliving the trauma, the systematic amputation of each finger performed with a hunting knife heated in flames to cauterize the wounds, ensuring he wouldn't bleed to death. They left me in the snow to die slowly from exposure or infection, whichever came first. I must have crawled delirious with pain until I reached your property. But there's something else, Julian said abruptly, his brow furrowed with concentration. Something important I discovered before they took me. Not just the water diversion, but who was helping Blackwood. I found documents, a partnership agreement, I think, with signatures. Important signatures. The governor, Alara said, suddenly remembering something Thomas had mentioned in passing. Thomas suspected the territorial governor might be involved. That's why he couldn't go to the authorities. Yes, Julian exclaimed, the memory surfacing. The governor and someone else, someone trusted by the community, who was providing medical verification for deaths that were actually murders. Mills. Alara breathed, horror dawning. The doctor. Thomas marked his name in his journal with a question mark just before he died. He suspected Mills was involved somehow. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place for Alara, and she knew with bone-deep certainty that Silas Blackwood wasn't working alone, but had corrupted the highest levels of territorial authority. This wasn't just about one man's greed, but a systematic conspiracy that had claimed dozens of lives, including her beloved Thomas. Dawn found them still talking planning, as Julian insisted they needed to reach his family's ranch, to warn them of Blackwood's methods and to unite forces against him. My brothers would have searched for me, but in that blizzard with no trail to follow, they likely assumed the worst. He said, pacing the small kitchen where Alara was packing provisions for their journey. By now, Blackwood probably believes I'm dead, which gives us an advantage. He won't be expecting me to resurface, especially not with evidence against him. Alara hesitated, torn between the need for justice and the fear of leaving the only home she had left. What if they failed? What if Blackwood was too powerful for even the Vance family to challenge? But looking at Julianne, his face alight with purpose. Despite everything he'd lost, she knew she couldn't stay hiding on her ranch, waiting for Blackwood to eventually claim it too. They would leave at nightfall, traveling under cover of darkness for as long as possible to avoid being spotted by Blackwood's roaming men. As Alara gathered supplies, her hand brushed against Thomas's old telegraph key, tucked away in a drawer since his death. On impulse, she pulled it out, studying the brass device thoughtfully. Thomas had been an amateur telegraph operator in his youth, maintaining connections with operators throughout the territory, which had proved useful for his investigations. Julian, she called, holding up the telegraph key. How good is your Morse code? A slow smile spread across his face, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. Impeccable. My father insisted all his sons learn it for ranch communications during storms. Then I have an idea. Alara said, her mind racing with possibilities. If Blackwood has men watching the roads, we might be able to warn your family of our arrival without alerting his spies. They never made it past the ridge that marked the northern boundary of Alara's property. As dusk fell, and they led their horses from the barn, saddlebags packed with provisions, and what little evidence Julian had managed to gather before his abduction, the first warning came in the form of a rifle shot that kicked up dirt at their feet. Alara's heart sank as she counted the riders emerging from the tree line. 7 of them, all armed, all wearing the distinctive gold pocket watches that marked them as Blackwood's men. Among them, to her shock and rage, was Dr. Mills, his medical bag exchanged for a shotgun, his expression grim and determined. "I'm sorry, Alara," he called, though he didn't sound particularly remorseful. "But you should have taken the offer when it was made. Blackwood doesn't tolerate defiance, and neither do I. You were Thomas's friend." She spat the words like venom. "He trusted you. Thomas was a fool who didn't understand progress." Mills replied coldly. "Blackwood's bringing civilization to this territory, railroads, commerce, opportunity. A few sacrifices are necessary for the greater good. Is that what you told yourself when you helped murder my husband?" Alara raised her rifle, sighting down the barrel directly at Mills's chest. "Was it for the greater good when you stood by while they cut off Julian's fingers?" A flicker of surprise crossed Mills's face as he glanced at Julian. "So the amnesiac remembers who he is. All the more reason this ends now." He raised his hand, signaling to the men around him. "Take the Vance boy alive. Blackwood wants to finish what he started personally. The woman is expendable." The first shot came without warning from one of Mills's men, Alara barely diving behind a water trough in time as the bullet whispered past her ear. Julian, who was weaponless, made a desperate dash for the barn, his speed and agility surprising everyone. 2 riders broke formation to pursue him, while the others concentrated their fire on Alara's position, keeping her pinned down behind inadequate cover. "Oi, Julian, run!" she screamed, knowing he stood no chance against armed men with his handicap. But Julian had no intention of running. From within the barn came a sudden crash, followed by panicked whinnying as he released the horses, sending them galloping in all directions, creating momentary chaos among the attackers. In the confusion, Alara managed to take aim, dropping one of Mills's men with a clean shot to the shoulder. Not a killing shot, she wasn't ready to cross that line, but enough to take him out of the fight. What followed was a desperate firefight, Alara defending their position from behind stacked hay bales with her husband's rifle, while Julian, despite his handicap, used farm tools and his intimate knowledge of ranching to create distractions and obstacles for their attackers. They held off the initial assault, but a stray bullet grazed Alara's arm, tearing through muscle and leaving her dominant shooting hand weakened and bloodied. Julian, seeing her injury, dragged her deeper into the barn, barricading the door with farm equipment. "We can't stay here," he said, tearing a strip from his shirt to bind her wound. "They'll either wait us out or burn the barn down around us." Alara winced as he tightened the makeshift bandage. "There's a back exit through the tack room, but they'll have that covered too." Julian's eyes gleamed with sudden inspiration. "The piano. Your piano has a player mechanism, doesn't it? Thomas mentioned bringing one from back east." Alara nodded, understanding dawning. It was the reason he chose that specific model, said he wanted music in the house even when neither of us could play. "But the house is 50 yards away, across open ground. We'd never make it, not without a distraction." Julian agreed, his tactical mind working rapidly. "How much ammunition do you have left?" 4 shots, she answered grimly. "Not enough." Julian's gaze swept the barn, landing on a shelf of supplies. "Black powder," he said, moving toward it. "Thomas kept blasting powder for clearing stumps, right?" "Yes, but Julian, what are you thinking?" His expression was grimly determined as he began gathering materials. "I'm thinking we need a symphony of chaos, Mrs. Dawson. And I'm about to compose it." Under fire and racing against time, Julian constructed 3 rudimentary explosive devices using blasting powder, farming chemicals, and glass containers. With Alara's help, they rigged a delayed ignition system using candle stubs that would burn down at different rates, creating a sequence of explosions. While Julian prepared the diversion, Alara used the last of her ammunition to keep Mills's men at bay, buying precious minutes. "When the first explosion hits, run for the house," Julian instructed. Get to the piano, set it to play that Beethoven piece, and then meet me at the root cellar entrance. We'll have maybe 3 minutes before they realize it's a diversion." "What about you?" Alara demanded, noting he hadn't included himself in the first part of the plan. "I'll create a secondary diversion here," he said grimly. "They need to believe we're still in the barn, or this won't work." "I'm not leaving you behind," she protested. "You have to," Julian insisted. "One of us needs to reach my family with the evidence. This isn't just about us anymore, Alara. It's about everyone. Blackwood has hurt everyone he will hurt if we don't stop him." He pressed Thomas's journal into her hands. "Your husband died trying to expose the truth. Don't let that be for nothing." Before she could argue further, Julian triggered the first explosive, sending it sailing through the barn's back window. The blast shook the ground, smoke and debris filling the air as he shoved Alara toward the door. "Now run!" Heart pounding, Alara sprinted across the open yard toward the house bullets, kicking up dirt around her as Mills's men recovered from their surprise and resumed firing. The second explosion, larger than the first, erupted from the barn, sending a shower of flaming debris into the night sky. Julian had created a spectacularly effective diversion, but she feared a terrible cost to himself. Inside the house, she fumbled with the player piano mechanism, her wounded arm throbbing with pain, as she inserted the Moonlight Sonata roll. The haunting melody began to fill the house as she slipped out the back door toward the root cellar entrance, her heart in her throat, as she searched the darkness for any sign of Julian. The third explosion rocked the property, smoke billowing from the now burning barn. Had Julian made it out? Was he lying wounded or worse inside the inferno? Alara had no time to search the growing flames. Already licking at the barn's wooden structure, illuminated Mills and his men, converging on the house, drawn by the piano music. She ducked into the root cellar, pulling the half-concealed door closed behind her, plunging herself into total darkness. Feeling her way forward, she navigated the familiar space, reaching the back wall, where Thomas had constructed a hidden escape tunnel, a precaution from his days as a Union scout during the war. The narrow passage would lead to the old mining claim, half a mile away, their best hope for escape, if Julian had survived to join her. Going somewhere. Mills's voice froze her blood. He stood in the tunnel entrance, lantern in one hand, revolver in the other, his silhouette blocking the only exit. "I've known about this tunnel for years, Alara. Thomas showed it to me himself back when he still trusted me." Trapped with nowhere to run, Alara backed against the earthen wall, her mind racing for options. Where was Julian? Had he been captured or killed? Well, why Mills? She demanded, playing for time. Why betray everything you claim to stand for? You're a doctor, you took an oath to heal. Progress requires sacrifice. Mills replied, his tone almost professorial. This territory is changing, Alara. The future belongs to men like Blackwood. Men with vision and the strength to make difficult choices. I chose the winning side. You chose murder, she spat. Thomas trusted you with everything, including his suspicions. He came to you first, didn't he, before the Vances? A smug smile spread across Mills's face. Your husband was painfully naive. He actually believed I would help him expose the corruption, as he called it. He never understood that what Blackwood is building will bring unprecedented prosperity to this region. The railroad is coming, Alara, and with it, civilization, fortune, opportunity. A few displaced ranchers, a few strategic deaths, these are small prices to pay for progress. And what about this? Alara nodded toward his gun. Is my death another acceptable price? I'm afraid so, Mills said, raising his revolver. Though I did try to spare you. The offer for your land was more than fair, considering. Fair? Alara laughed bitterly. Blackwood killed my husband, stole my future, and expected me to thank him for pennies on the dollar. Sentiment is expensive, Mrs. Dawson. Now where is Julian Vance? A new voice answered from behind Mills, calm and deadly in its quietness. "Right here, Doctor." Mills whirled to find Julian standing behind him, something metallic gleaming in his ruined hands. Before the doctor could react, Julian swung the heavy shovel with surprising force, connecting solidly with Mills's skull. The doctor crumpled without a sound, the lantern shattering as it hit the ground, plunging the tunnel into darkness. "Julian." Alara gasped, relief flooding her. "I thought you were dead." "Not yet," he replied, his voice strained. Even in the darkness, she could hear the pain in it. Though not for Mills's lack of trying. "Are you hurt?" "Just my arm," she assured him, moving carefully toward his voice. "But you..." "The barn was burning. I got out through the hay drop," he explained. "But not before one of their bullets found me." As her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she could make out his silhouette and the darker patch spreading across his side. "We need to move Alara. The others will have heard the shot Mills never got to fire. You're bleeding badly," she protested, touching the warm wetness that soaked his shirt. "And I'll bleed just as badly standing here," he countered with grim humor. "The mining tunnel is our only chance now." Supporting each other, they made their way through the cramped escape passage, Julian's breathing becoming increasingly labored as blood loss took its toll. When they finally emerged from Thomas's tunnel, they found themselves a half-mile from the burning ranch, near the entrance to the abandoned mining claim, exactly where they had planned to go before Mills's ambush. "We made it." Alara breathed, staring back at the orange glow on the horizon that marked her burning home. Everything she owned, everything she and Thomas had built together, was going up in flames before her eyes. The sight should have broken her, but instead she felt a strange calm settle over her buildings. Could be rebuilt land, could be reclaimed, but the evidence they carried might be their only chance at justice. Not quite yet. Julian said grimly, pressing a hand against his bleeding side. "We still need to reach the main mining tunnel. That's our only path north to my family's ranch now. They'll have men watching every road and trail." The tunnel was everything Julian had promised, and everything Alara feared, a black maw in the earth that seemed to exhale the musty breath of the long-buried. With only a small lantern they'd recovered from the entrance to guide them, and they ventured into the oppressive darkness, Julian leading despite his injury, his memory of the old mining maps proving accurate as they navigated the main shaft. Hours passed in tense silence, the only sounds their footsteps and the occasional drip of water from the ceiling, a constant reminder of the tons of earth suspended above them. "Wait," Julian whispered suddenly, his hand catching Alara's arm. "Listen." At first, she heard nothing. But then it came the distant sound of voices echoing through the tunnel behind them, and something else, a rushing sound like wind through trees, but deeper, more ominous. "They know these tunnels." Julian realized, his voice tight with alarm. "That's not possible unless what? Unless Blackwood's water diversion scheme uses the old mining system." Julian concluded, his mind racing despite blood loss and exhaustion. These tunnels must connect to whatever he's built to control the watershed. Then we might be walking right into his operation. Alara said the implications clear. "Or we might find the evidence we need to bring him down," Julian countered. "Either way, we can't go back." The rushing sound grew louder, more threatening. Julian's face paled with sudden understanding. "They've opened the floodgates. They're trying to drown us like rats in a trap." They ran the thundering water gaining on them with every step, debris carried by the artificial flood, slamming against the tunnel walls in a terrifying cacophony. Julian's wound slowed him down, blood leaving a trail behind them that would soon be washed away by the approaching deluge. Just when it seemed certain they would be overtaken, he spotted a maintenance ladder bolted to the wall, leading upward toward what appeared to be an access hatch. "There," he gasped, pointing with a bloodied hand. That's our only chance. With his mutilated hands, climbing presented a nearly impossible challenge, each rung requiring excruciating pressure on his healing stumps. Ilara climbed below him, supporting his weight, when his strength faltered, pushing him upward, when his grip failed them. The water had reached their ankles, then their knees rising with terrifying speed as they struggled up the rusting ladder. I can't. Julian faltered, his face gray with pain and blood loss. You can, Ilara insisted, shoving him upward with desperate strength. Your family's waiting, Julian. Justice for Thomas is waiting. Don't you dare give up now. The water had reached her waist when Julian finally made it to the hatch, straining against it, with his shoulder and back, rather than his useless hands. For one horrifying moment, it refused to budge decades of disuse, sealing it shut as effectively as any lock. The water swirled around Ilara's chest, now rising faster than seemed possible. The tunnel becoming a pressurized pipe as more floodgates opened somewhere in the distance. Julian! She screamed as the current threatened to tear her from the ladder, with a roar of defiance that seemed to come from somewhere beyond conscious thought. Julian threw himself against the hatch one final time. Metal screamed against metal as ancient hinges gave way, the hatch bursting open just as the water closed over Ilara's head. Julian's hands, those ruined hands that couldn't grasp properly, couldn't play piano, couldn't even button a shirt, without struggle somehow found the strength to clamp around her wrists, dragging her up through the hatch into the cool night air, both of them collapsing on solid ground, as water gushed from the opening beside them. When they finally recovered enough to take in their surroundings, they discovered they had emerged on unfamiliar ground. But Julian oriented himself quickly, pointing north where they would find the main road leading eventually to his family's ranch. The stars told him they had traveled several miles through the tunnel system, emerging much closer to the Vance property than he had dared hope. Despite his injury, they might reach his family by morning if they pushed themselves. You need medical attention. Ilara insisted, examining his wound in the moonlight. The bullet had passed through his side, but the bleeding continued at a worrying rate. Field medicine first, then proper treatment at the ranch. Julian replied with the stoicism of someone raised on frontier hardship. Using strips torn from their already soaked clothing, Ilara created a pressure bandage that slowed the bleeding enough to continue their journey, though Julian's face remained alarmingly pale, his breathing shallow. The journey north was a brutal test of endurance, across terrain deliberately chosen for its difficulty, avoiding main roads and settlements, where word of their passing might reach Blackwood. Julian's determination continued to impress Ilara, his body functioning on sheer willpower long after physical reserves had been depleted. She supported him when his strength faltered, her own injured arm throbbing in sympathy with each step. They spoke little during those hours of walking, saving energy for the grueling trek. But the silence between them had changed from that of strangers to the comfortable quiet of those who have faced death together and emerged stronger for it. On the morning of the third day, as they crested a rise, Julian stopped suddenly, his expression transforming as he gazed at the valley spread below them. There, nestled against the backdrop of distant mountains, stood the Vance Ranch House, a sprawling structure of timber and stone surrounded by outbuildings, corrals, and the signs of prosperity that came from generations of careful stewardship. Home. He whispered the word, carrying all the weight of his journey from privileged son to torture victim, to this moment of potential redemption. But his relief was short-lived. As they drew closer, and details emerged, a lack of activity around the buildings, smoke rising from only one chimney, when there should have been several, the absence of hands working the nearby fields. Julian's pace quickened, anxiety evident in every line of his body, and Ilara struggled to keep up as they approached the main house, her hand resting on his arm, supporting his increasingly unstable gait. The reunion with Julian's family was bittersweet, marked by shock, grief, and rage in equal measure. His eldest brother, Michael, had been seriously wounded in a hunting accident 2 weeks prior, that everyone recognized as Blackwood's attempt to destabilize the Vance holdings before making his move. His other brother, Daniel, had sent most of the ranch hands and their families into town for safety, keeping only a skeleton crew of the most loyal hands to defend the property. Their mother, Eleanor, a formidable woman who had helped build the ranch alongside her late husband, wept openly at the sight of Julian's mutilated hands before her expression hardened into one of cold fury that made Alara understand exactly where Julian had inherited his determination. Julian. Michael embraced his brother carefully, mindful of Julian's obvious injury and his own bandaged shoulder. "We thought you were dead. We searched for weeks." "I very nearly was," Julian replied, his voice steadier than his body as he swayed slightly from blood loss. "My God, what did they do to you?" Daniel asked, his voice breaking as he caught sight of his brother's ruined hands. Unlike Michael's controlled demeanor, Daniel's emotions played openly across his face, horror and rage battling for dominance. "What Blackwood does to those who oppose him," Julian answered simply. "But I survived, and I brought evidence." He gestured toward Alara, who still carried Thomas's journal and the maps they'd recovered. "This is Alara Dawson. Her husband was murdered for the same information I was gathering. She saved my life and risked everything to get me here." Eleanor stepped forward, studying Alara with shrewd eyes that missed nothing. "Then we owe you a debt we can never repay, Mrs. Dawson. Welcome to our home." Her gaze shifted to her son's bloodied side. "But explanations must wait. You both need medical attention immediately." "No doctors," Alara said sharply, thinking of Mills. "We can't trust them. Our ranch foreman's wife was a field nurse during the war," Michael assured her. "She's seen to all our medical needs for years. No outsiders, I promise." As Julian was led away for treatment, Alara reluctantly surrendered the journal and maps to Michael, explaining their significance. His engineer's mind quickly grasped the implications of Thomas's meticulous documentation. "This is extraordinary," he murmured, examining the calculations. "Your husband managed to map the entire diversion system based solely on surface observations. The precision is remarkable." Thomas was methodical. Alara said, pride mixing with grief. He spent months tracking flow rates, testing soil, comparing historical records. "And it cost him his life," Michael said gravely. "Just as it nearly cost Julian his. Blackwood must have realized how close we were getting to exposing him. It's worse than just Blackwood." Alara explained, sharing what they had learned about the governor's involvement and Mills's betrayal. "The corruption goes all the way to the territorial capital. There's nowhere to turn for justice through official channels." Michael's expression darkened. "We received a formal offer from Blackwood yesterday, claiming a merger would benefit both families. When we refused, his representative warned that accidents like mine tend to happen when people make poor business decisions. Now I understand the urgency behind his sudden interest in partnership. He knows Julian might have survived." Daniel interjected, having returned from seeing his brother settled. Unlike Michael's controlled demeanor, Daniel radiated barely contained fury. "That's why he's moving against us directly now, trying to force our hand before Julian can expose him. Or before we can connect with other ranchers who've been victimized," Michael added thoughtfully. "Together with this evidence and Julian's testimony, we might have enough to bypass the governor, go directly to federal authorities." "If we live that long," Daniel said grimly. "Blackwood won't wait now that he knows Julian is alive and has evidence." His prediction proved prophetic. That night, as Alara slept in an unfamiliar bed, exhausted from their ordeal, a ranch hand burst into the main house with alarming news. Riders had been spotted approaching from the south, at least 20 armed men flying Blackwood's colors. The Baron himself rode at the front alongside Dr. Mills, both men armed and determined. The attack Alara and Julian had barely escaped had simply been relocated to the Vance Ranch on a larger, more dangerous scale. "Wake Julian," Michael ordered, taking immediate command despite his wounded shoulder. "Daniel, get Mother to the storm cellar with the house staff. Arm everyone who can hold a weapon and position them according to our defense plan. Julian shouldn't be moved." Alara protested, thinking of his blood loss and precarious condition. "He needs rest to recover. What he needs is to survive the night," Michael countered grimly. "And none of us will if Blackwood breaches the house." Julian, despite his weakened state, insisted on joining the defense, planning, his tactical mind still sharp, despite fever and pain. As Eleanor supervised the movement of non-combatants to the storm cellar, Julian, Michael, and Daniel gathered in the study maps of the property spread across the massive oak desk that had belonged to their father. "Blackwood will expect us to concentrate our defense here at the main house," Julian said, indicating the central building. "His first move will likely be to draw our attention frontally while sending men around to the rear. Standard military tactics," Michael agreed. "Divide our forces, then overwhelm us with superior numbers." Daniel's expression was thunderous. "I say we take the fight to them. A preemptive strike before they reach the house." "With what forces?" Michael countered. "We have 12 able-bodied men against their 20+. We'd be slaughtered in open ground." "So we just sit here and wait to be burned out?" Daniel demanded. "Neither." Julian interrupted, his amber eyes gleaming with the same strategic intelligence that had kept them alive in the tunnel. "We use what they don't expect us to use: music." Music," Daniel repeated incredulously. "Have you lost your mind, along with your fingers?" Julian didn't flinch at the cruel jab, knowing it came from fear rather than malice. "Sound carries for miles in this valley, especially at night. We can use that to our advantage." What Julian proposed was audacious, bordering on insane, a symphony of deception using the ranch's communication systems, mechanical devices, and Julian's intimate knowledge of acoustics to create the illusion of forces where none existed, drawing Blackwood's men into carefully prepared traps. The old church bell from the ranch chapel would be rigged to ring at intervals, simulating signals between fictional defensive positions. The player piano in the main house would be set to play at specific times, creating the impression of normalcy and concentration of forces. Most ingeniously, Julian suggested using Thomas's telegraph key to tap out false messages that Blackwood's men would assume were communications with reinforcements from town. "It's not enough," Michael said after reviewing the plan. "Even with all these deceptions, they still outnumber us significantly." "Then we need to reduce their numbers," Julian replied calmly. "And I know exactly how to do it." The attack came just after midnight, a coordinated assault meant to catch the defenders sleeping. What the attackers didn't know was that the Vance family had been prepared for hours, executing Julian's intricate plan of acoustic deception and strategic positioning. As Blackwood's men approached the property, a series of sounds began to emerge from different directions, the church bell ringing in an apparent signal, and the clatter of the telegraph from an outbuilding, voices calling orders that seemed to indicate a much larger defensive force than actually existed. Blackwood himself led from the rear, allowing his hired guns to test the defenses first, a tactical error in Julian's estimation that revealed the Baron's fundamental cowardice. As the first wave of attackers approached the main house, gunfire erupted from positions that seemed randomly distributed across the property, forcing them to split their attention and divide their forces exactly as Julian had planned. "No stealth. Hold positions," Julian commanded through the network of ranch hands positioned according to his design. "Let them come to us." The pre-dawn attack intensified just after 3 in the morning. Blackwood, apparently informed of Julian's return by the men who had failed at Alara's ranch, had decided to end the threat once and for all. The first sign was the fire set in the eastern stables, followed quickly by an assault on the main house. A coordinated effort meant to divide the defenders and create chaos. Julian proved his worth in those desperate hours, not with physical strength, but with strategic brilliance, positioning their limited forces to maximum effect, utilizing his intimate knowledge of the property to anticipate and counter Blackwood's moves. When ammunition ran low, he directed the creation of improvised explosives from ranch chemicals. When men fell wounded, he devised a pulley system to move them to safety while maintaining their defensive positions. Through it all, Alara fought beside him, her marksmanship honed by years of protecting her own smaller property, proving invaluable as she picked off attackers from the upper windows. Julian. Michael's urgent call came from the south wall, where he'd been monitoring Blackwood's movements. "They're bringing up something looks like barrels." Julian joined his brother at the window, his face grim, as he observed the activity below. "Blasting oil. They're going to blow the main gate. We can't hold against that." Michael said, the engineer in him quickly calculating the damage such an explosion would cause. "The entire front section will collapse." Julian's mind raced, searching for options, when suddenly an idea struck him. Bold, dangerous, but potentially their only chance. "The piano," he said softly, causing both Michael and Alara, who had joined them, to look at him in confusion. "Your piano in the music room, it's positioned directly above the front entrance, isn't it?" Julian clarified. "Yes, but what?" "Pianos weigh nearly 800 pounds. Julian explained quickly. "If we position it directly over the entrance and trigger it to fall when they detonate their explosives, it could crush anyone entering." Michael finished, understanding dawning. "And the confusion might give us the opening we need for a counterattack." "Exactly. But I need something else, all the wire from the piano strings. With that, I can create a tripwire system throughout the front hall." While Daniel coordinated the remaining ranch hands for the potential counterattack, Julian, Alara, and Michael worked feverishly to implement their desperate plan. The piano was positioned Michael's engineering expertise, ensuring it would fall precisely when triggered. Julian, despite his handicap and injury, worked with remarkable dexterity to create an intricate system of tripwires, using the piano strings nearly invisible, but strong enough to entangle anyone rushing through the entrance. It was dangerous, improvised work with no guarantee of success, but it was all they had. The explosion, when it came, shook the entire house, the sound deafening as the front entrance collapsed in a cloud of dust and debris. Just as planned, the piano crashed down with devastating effect, catching the first wave of Blackwood's men as they charged through the breach. The tripwires performed exactly as Julian had intended, causing chaos and confusion as men stumbled and fell, providing perfect targets for the defenders positioned on the upper level. In the chaos that followed, Julian spotted a critical opportunity. Blackwood himself had entered the house clearly confident in his imminent victory, and now found himself separated from the bulk of his forces by the collapsed piano and entangled men. With a silent signal to Alara, Julian moved swiftly despite his injury, maneuvering behind Blackwood, using the dust and confusion as cover. When he emerged, it was with a length of piano wire wrapped around his palms. The pianist, without fingers, had found a way to make his handicap an advantage. "It's over, Blackwood," Julian said, pressing the wire against the Baron's throat just firmly enough to make his point. "Call off your men, or die here." Blackwood went rigid with shock at the voice behind him. "Vance, you're supposed to be dead. You should have checked more thoroughly." Julian replied, his voice dangerously soft. "Now call them off." For a moment, it seemed Blackwood might comply. But with a sudden movement, he drove his elbow backward into Julian's wounded side, causing him to double over in pain, the piano wire slipping from his grasp. Blackwood whirled, drawing a hidden derringer from his vest, aiming directly at Julian's head. "I should have cut your throat along with your fingers," he snarled, finger tightening on the trigger. The shot that rang out wasn't from Blackwood's Derringer, but from Alara's rifle. The bullet striking the Baron's shoulder, causing the small pistol to discharge harmlessly into the ceiling. Julian, despite his pain, tackled the wounded Blackwood, driving him to the ground, where Daniel quickly joined the struggle, securing the Baron with rope, hastily repurposed from the defense effort. The tide turned just after sunrise, when Julian, implementing the most daring part of his defensive strategy, deliberately collapsed part of the northern corral, creating a choke point that trapped 8 of Blackwood's remaining men in the open. In the confusion that followed, Daniel led a counterattack that broke the back of the assault, forcing the attackers into retreat. Among the captured was Mills, who had remained safely behind the front lines until the tide of battle turned against them. "We should hang them both right now," Daniel argued, gesturing toward Blackwood and Mills, who sat bound and under guard in the ranch's main room. "For Julian's fingers, for Michael's shoulder, for all the ranchers they've driven out or killed." "No," Julian said firmly, despite his evident exhaustion, blood seeping through his hastily rebandaged side. "We're not him. We don't deal in midnight justice and backroom murders. They face proper charges before proper authorities. The authorities are corrupt." Daniel exploded. "You said yourself the governor is involved." "Not all of them," Julian countered. "There's still the federal marshal in Denver. He answers to Washington, not the territorial government." But the greatest shock came during the search of Blackwood's saddlebags. Among the papers and maps was a document that stunned everyone present, a partnership agreement between Silas Blackwood and none other than the territorial governor himself, outlining their shared interest in the water diversion scheme, with profits to be divided equally once all necessary properties had been acquired. The governor's signature and personal seal left no room for doubt as to his complicity. "So that's why justice has been so elusive," Alara whispered, staring at the document that explained so much: the perfunctory investigation into Thomas's murder, the marshal's reluctance to challenge Blackwood's expanding empire, the systematic failure of legal remedies against the Baron's crimes. The corruption goes all the way to the top. "This changes everything," Michael said gravely. "We can't take this to the governor now." "No," Julian agreed. "But we can take it directly to the federal marshal in Denver. With evidence this substantial, they'll have no choice but to act, not just against Blackwood, but against the governor himself." As plans formed to transport their prisoners and evidence to Denver, a commotion from outside drew their attention. A rider was approaching at breakneck speed, flying not Blackwood's colors, but the distinctive badge of the federal marshal's office. The newcomer reined in hard, dismounting before his horse had fully stopped, his expression grave as he surveyed the aftermath of battle. Marshal James Cooper. He introduced himself, flashing credentials that identified him as a federal rather than territorial officer. "I've been investigating corruption in this territory for 6 months now." His gaze fell on the captured Blackwood. "I see you've saved me some trouble. How did you know to come here?" Julian asked, suspicion evident in his voice. "A letter reached my office 3 days ago," Cooper explained. "From one Thomas Dawson, postmarked shortly before his death. He sent copies of his findings to multiple federal offices, smart man, knowing he might not live to deliver them personally." Ilara's hand flew to her mouth, tears forming unbidden. Thomas knew they were coming for him. He made contingencies. "Indeed, ma'am. His evidence started our investigation. I've been working my way through Blackwood's operation from the outside in. When I heard about the assault on this ranch, I rode straight through, knowing it might be connected. But Cooper's arrival brought with it a revelation none of them had anticipated. As he reviewed Thomas's journal and the evidence they'd gathered, his expression grew increasingly troubled. "There's something else you should know," he said finally, looking directly at Eleanor Vance. "Something about your late husband and his connection to all this. The room went silent, A's eyes turning to the family matriarch, who stood straighter, her aristocratic features betraying nothing. "What about my husband, Marshall?" According to Thomas Dawson's notes, Edward Vance was the first to discover the water diversion possibility years ago during initial surveys of the territory. Cooper's words fell like stones in still water. He rejected the idea on moral grounds, but not before documenting its feasibility. Those original surveys are what Blackwood used to create his diversion system. Someone had to have given them to him, someone with access to Vance family records. "Are you suggesting my husband cooperated with that monster?" Eleanor demanded, her voice tight with controlled fury. "No, ma'am, I'm suggesting something worse. Based on the timeline in these documents, Edward Vance was murdered shortly after refusing to participate in Blackwood's scheme. His hunting accident wasn't an accident at all. The revelation hit the Vance family like a physical blow. Their father's death 5 years earlier had been attributed to a fall from his horse during a solitary hunting expedition, an explanation that had never fully satisfied Julian, but which the family had eventually accepted. And there's more," Cooper continued grimly. Thomas Dawson wasn't just gathering evidence randomly. According to his notes, he was specifically recruited for the task by someone who suspected the truth about Edward Vance's death, your husband's former business partner, Governor Samuel Hayes. "The governor?" Michael echoed in disbelief. "But his signature is on the partnership agreement with Blackwood." "A forgery," Cooper explained. "Expertly done, but definitely not genuine. The real Governor Hayes has been quietly investigating Blackwood for years, using Thomas Dawson as his eyes and ears in the territory. When Dawson was murdered, Hayes feared his own position had been compromised, which is why he reached out to federal authorities. So the governor isn't corrupt," Daniel said, slowly processing this twist. "Not corrupt, but cautious to the point of inaction." Cooper clarified. He suspected Blackwood had infiltrated his office, but couldn't identify the traitors. Rather than risk exposing his investigation, he maintained a careful distance, even when it meant letting injustices continue temporarily. A decision he's come to regret deeply, especially after Julian's abduction and mutilation. Ilara struggled to absorb these revelations, her understanding of events continuously shifting. Thomas hadn't been working alone, but as part of a larger investigation initiated by the governor himself. His death hadn't been in vain, his careful documentation reaching exactly the authorities he'd intended, even if he hadn't lived to see justice done. Mills, who had been silent throughout this exchange, suddenly laughed, a sound devoid of humor or sanity. "You think you've won, don't you? You think capturing Blackwood and me ends this? The dam is already built and the systems are in place. One word from me and the floodgates open. Every ranch from here to the Southern Territory will be underwater by morning." Julian moved faster than anyone would have thought possible in his condition, crossing the room to grab Mills by his shirt. "What are you talking about? What floodgates?" Mills's smile was that of a madman who had nothing left to lose. "Why do you think we let you escape through the mining tunnels? Leading you straight to the control room was no accident. The charges are already set. Destroy Blackwood or me, and you destroy everything." Michael's engineering mind grasped the implication immediately. He's created a dead man switch. If he doesn't send regular signals to his men, they'll blow the main water containment structures. Thousands will die. Mills continued, clearly relishing their horror. Ranches, farms, settlements, all washed away. Release us now, or be responsible for the greatest disaster this territory has ever seen. The final confrontation culminated not in a gunfight, but in a desperate race against time. With Mills's reluctant guidance secured, only after Cooper promised immunity from the death penalty, Julie and Michael, and a team of the most trusted ranch hands, rode out to the main control facility, hidden within the mountain tunnels. What they found there confirmed their worst fears, an elaborate system of water diversions built over years capable of controlling water access throughout the territory, and rigged with enough explosives to create a catastrophic flood that would destroy everything in its path. "Can you disarm it?" Julian asked, as Michael examined the complex mechanism his engineer's mind, working rapidly to understand its design. "Given enough time, yes," Michael answered. "But we don't have enough time. The timing mechanism is already activated. We have less than 3 hours before those charges blow." "Then we disable the floodgates themselves," Julian suggested. "Ensure that even if the charges detonate, the water can't be released all at once." "That might work," Michael agreed. "But it would require simultaneous action at 3 different control points spread throughout the tunnel system." "Then we split up," Julian said with the natural authority that had emerged through crisis. "You take the main control point, I'll take the eastern diversion, and Cooper can handle the western." The next hours passed in a desperate race against time. Julian, working through excruciating pain with his mutilated hands to adjust mechanical controls and diversion mechanisms never designed for someone without fingers. Every movement was agony, every adjustment requiring twice the time it would have taken with normal hands. Yet he persisted, driven by the knowledge that thousands of lives depended on his success. With minutes to spare, they managed to disable or divert the primary flood channels, ensuring that even when the charges detonated, as they did precisely at the deadline Mills had specified, the resulting damage was contained to unpopulated areas. The conspiracy that had claimed so many lives, including Thomas Dawson's, had been finally dismantled, not just through force of arms, but through the strategic thinking Blackwood had sought to eliminate when he cut off Julian's fingers. Silas Blackwood and Dr. Mills were transported to Denver to face federal charges for murder, fraud, and conspiracy against the territorial government. The trial that followed became legendary in the territory, a public accounting of years of corruption, violence, and murder that had gone unchecked for too long. When the verdict came down guilty on all counts with a sentence that ensured Blackwood would never again see freedom, there was a sense of collective exhale, as though the land itself could finally breathe easier without his shadow upon it. For Julian and Alara, however, the end of Blackwood's reign was just the beginning of their story. In the aftermath of the trial, Julian faced the challenge of reimagining his life, with the understanding that he would never again play the piano, as he once had never again experienced the pure joy of fingers dancing across keys, bringing classical masterpieces to life. There were dark days when the loss felt unbearable, when phantom pain in fingers long gone would wake him in the night, leaving him gasping and disoriented. Alara stood by him through these moments, her own grief for Thomas finding resolution as Julian's family ensured her ranch would be rebuilt and protected as part of their holdings, giving her the freedom to choose her path forward. That path increasingly led toward a partnership with Julian, one based initially on shared trauma, but blossoming into something deeper and more profound as healing began for both of them. The breakthrough came almost a year after Blackwood's conviction, on an evening much like the one when Julian had first remembered his identity. Alara had been practicing at the grand piano in the Vance family parlor, a much finer instrument than her own humble upright, struggling through a simple piece with determination, if not skill. Julian had been avoiding the room, unable to bear the reminder of all he had lost. But something drew him there that night, perhaps the particular melody she was attempting, or simply the time that had passed, making the pain less acute. He stood in the doorway, watching her fingers stumble over a complicated passage, her frustration evident, but her persistence unwavering. "You don't need to do this, you know," he said softly, entering the room. "Play for me, I mean." Alara looked up, surprised by his presence. "I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because every time I touch these keys, I feel connected to what we fought for, the right to build something beautiful in this harsh place. Isn't that what Thomas wanted? What you wanted too before?" Her voice trailed off, but Julian completed the thought. "Before Blackwood took my fingers." He held up his ruined hands, examining them in the lamplight. "You know what's strange? In my dreams, I can still play. Every night my fingers dance across keyboards, flawless performances of pieces I studied for years. Then I wake and—" He shrugged, the gesture eloquent in its resignation. Without conscious decision, he found himself crossing the room, sitting beside her on the bench, his ruined hands hovering over the keys in now familiar hesitation. But instead of attempting to play himself, he gently guided her movements, showing her through touch and murmured instruction how to bring the music to life. "There," he whispered as she followed his guidance, her playing immediately improving. "Feel the rhythm like a heartbeat. Music isn't in the fingers, Alara, it's in here." He touched his chest, then hers. "I can still hear it. I just need someone brave enough to bring it into the world." Thus began a collaboration unlike any other. Julien, composing in his head, working out complex arrangements that he could hear with perfect clarity, and Alara becoming his hands, learning to play with increasing skill under his tutelage. Together, they created music that was uniquely theirs, a blend of classical training and frontier sensibility that spoke of loss and redemption, hardship and hope. Julien found he could still feel the music, even if he couldn't physically create it alone. And Alara discovered a gift she never knew she possessed. Their first public performance at the territorial capital was met with stunned silence, followed by thunderous applause. The audience moved not just by the unusual sight of their four-handed technique, but by the emotional power of the music itself. Word spread, and invitations followed opportunities to share their story and their unique artistry with increasingly appreciative audiences. They were married the following spring in a ceremony that united not just two people, but two legacies: the Vance family wealth and influence, and Alara's smaller, but no less significant heritage of persistence and courage. Julien's hands remained a visible reminder of cruelty and injustice, but also became a symbol of adaptability and resilience. He would never again be the concert pianist he had trained to become, but he had found a different kind of music, one created through partnership and love, rather than solitary brilliance. As for Alara, she had transformed as well, from a widow clinging to the past to a woman fully engaged with life, helping other victims of violence find their voices and their strength just as she had found hers. Music finds a way. Julien often told those who asked how he continued to compose despite his injuries. Just as water finds its way through rock, persistence overcomes all obstacles. It was an apt metaphor for their partnership, Julien and Alara, flowing around obstacles, finding new channels when old ones were blocked, creating beauty where once there had been only pain. Together, they established a foundation to help those who had lost everything to Blackwood's schemes, using music not just as therapy, but as a means of rebuilding community in a territory long fractured by violence and corruption. And in every note they played, in every melody they created, there echoed the truth that had saved them both. That what makes us human is not what we lose, but what we create from what remains, a testament to the enduring ability to feel music again, even in the harshest darkness.